Almost there. All right, we are live. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Swanheiser. I am the program director here at the Biennial of the Americas, and we are live again this Friday for another edition of our Coffee Chat series. And today we are going to be talking with four amazing speakers on borders and migration. And I have the great pleasure of introducing them before we get started on this conversation. If at any time you have questions throughout this panel discussion, you can feel free to leave a comment on the video, and we'll be sure to try and get to those throughout the conversation. And please comment away and share in our event if you have comments on the conversation that you hear today. I'm going to begin by introducing our amazing speakers. We start with Maria Aguilar Correa, who is a Mexican immigrant and a binational attorney working at RAICES in Austin, Texas. Once an undocumented child herself, she takes pride in representing unaccompanied, undocumented children in their immigration proceedings. Next, we have Patricia Kumbakisaka, who was born in Romania and immigrated to Canada at the age of 10 with her parents, who are from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a country she has actually never visited herself. In 2020, she was named one of Canada's most accomplished Black women, and in 2018, she was nominated as Canada's youth delegate at the United Nations Assembly and was the first Black Canadian delegate. Next, Tania Chairez is an undocumented immigrant born in Chihuahua, Mexico. She was raised in Phoenix, Arizona. For the past decade, Tania has prioritized her passion for the intersection of immigration and education. She has been featured on the cover of Time magazine and is currently the National Outreach and Education Director for Motus Theater. And lastly, we have Cesar Cuauhtemoc Garcia Hernandez, who is an associate professor at the University of Denver, Sturm College of Law. He publishes crimecrimmigration.com, a blog about the convergence of criminal and immigration law. He is the author of two books, Crimmigration Law and Migrating to Prison, Immigration in the Age of Mass Incarceration. And Cesar will be our moderator today and kicking off this conversation for over the next hour. We hope you enjoy, and please feel free to comment away and ask questions as needed. Thank you, and I leave it to you all for the rest of this conversation.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Robin, for that introduction and for gathering the three speakers and me. It's an enormous honor to get to moderate this discussion, today's coffee chat. Migration, the fluidity of borders, and the people who cross borders are, of course, not new topics to the conversation, not in the United States, not in Canada, Mexico, across Europe, or anywhere else on the face of the earth, but across the Americas, and as indeed across the entire globe, we are constantly reminded that crossing borders is rife with political significance, enormous political significance. Through the lens of institutional politics, it's a simple act from which often reactionary policies arise and to which liberal remedies quite often respond. Through the lens of individual behavior, migration is also an act of defiance, a piecemeal, but a profound resistance to economic policies and to military adventures that impoverish, that target, and that displace millions of people annually. Some of us have the good fortune of crossing borders on an airplane with a passport in hand, and others of us propel ourselves across the Mediterranean or trudge across the Arizona desert. And in recent years, we've seen even the snowy forests of northern Vermont and southern Quebec added to the list of unsanctioned crossing points. More recently, we have all watched as the sanctioned crossing points have crawled to a halt, as airports have been closed by government decree or simply by individual determinations to stay away from those places. As COVID-19 travels across borders, we're reminded that borders are always permeable. But as the pandemic takes different forms in different places, we're also reminded that borders do indeed matter. In North America, the governments of Canada and Mexico are now facing an inverted version of a very familiar question. Do we keep out the other? Only now the other comes from the United States. My colleague at the University of Denver, the philosopher Thomas Nail, writes that everyone is almost always about to be a migrant. We are all moving, we are all about to move, or we are all one strong shove away from moving. Only sometimes we don't know it. In this moment, the centuries-old phenomenon of migrating, of human mobility across the boundaries of two distinct jurisdictions, whatever two distinct jurisdictions those are, takes on a different salience. Not a new salience and not a heightened salience, but only a different salience. Different because mobility has slowed, different because many of us who are not used to being looked at askance are suddenly viewed suspiciously. So in this moment, it is fitting to chat this morning with Patricia, with Maria, and with Tania about migration, about the fluidity of those borders themselves, and of course, about the people who cross those borders. So thank you each for joining me today. As I said before, it is my enormous privilege to get to moderate this conversation. So let me just jump right into the conversation by turning to Maria. Maria, the border between the United States and Mexico is a place. It's a physical location that we can point to it on a globe. We can point to it on a map, and it's a place that you have crossed personally many times over. The border is also an idea. It's the notion that at this location on the map, that place along the Rio Grande River, or the road between ambos Nogales, and between Nogales, Sonora and Nogales, Arizona, that this is the location at which two distinct entities meet, or maybe begin to separate, depending on your perspective. Now, as a child, you lived in the United States without the federal government's authorization. As a young adult, you became a lawyer in Mexico City. Now you're a lawyer in Texas, in Austin, I believe. Now, given your diverse experiences and your extensive ties to both Mexico and the United States, what does the border represent to you?
Thank you. I'm also glad to be here with you this morning to chat about, what you were saying, this hot topic. I would say, as you were saying, what the border means to me, you're very right when you describe it as, yes, like a physical place where you can point out as the separation. In that sense, although I'm very blessed to be able to have crossed many times right now, I don't think I would have a count of how many times I have crossed the physical border, it still makes me nervous. It still does. I'm still somehow a foreigner. So every single time that I do cross the border, I get like this little bit of tiny nervous, and that might be my 7-year-old version inside, kind of like, feeling a little fussy about the transaction. Yet, when I talk about the idea, which to me the border has been of a lot of significance, it is like living two realities. At least it has the case. It's been the case for me. I think that whenever I think of myself as a Mexican national and living in Mexico, being an attorney, being born and raised in Mexico, because I only lived briefly as a child here in the United States, I was, part of a majority. I was yet a woman, and although it's a vulnerable a section of the society to live or to be part of in Mexico, once I returned to the United States as a legal permanent resident, once I started seeing that although I was a professional in Mexico, I could not practice immediately in the United States. I still didn't have the same opportunities. I still had a thick accent. I still had this idea in the back of my mind that it took me a little while to translate all my thoughts, and that would make me seem slower, or that would make people hesitate from my capacity to do certain tasks, because English is not my native language, because it's my second language. And I didn't learn it until pretty late in my at age. So realizing that I was a different person in the United States, identifying as an undocumented child took me years after I arrived here. Feeling courage enough to speak about it and say, oh, I was an undocumented child took also a lot of time and a lot of mental process for it. Realizing that there was a different standard for temporary and permanent visitors or foreigners staying in the United States was also a hit to me. So I think that having lived in Austin specifically for almost a third of my life, I feel confident to say that although the border still makes me nervous, I have started to love it in a very different way. And it has, shown me that although we're very different, and although it, because of my work, implies a lot of, social justice issues, it also means that there is much more that we can enjoy: breakfast tacos, norteño music, Tejano music. I am the same person. I just have a different reality that I have to embrace and grow from. So the border to me is very dear to my heart. There is dreams on both sides, and you just have to learn your way with time to kind of entangle them and learn to hold them hand by hand.
Yeah. Well, so the border is not just a place, it's not just an idea, but it's also becomes a central component of identity. It sounds like one like so many parts of our identity which we have a complicated relationship with, right? You start to love it in a different way. You said now, Patricia, like Maria, you're also no stranger to borders. Moving as much as you have in your life, Bucharest, Athens, Winnipeg, Ottawa, you've experienced the benefits and also the costs of migration. New beginnings, after all, they certainly bring an enormous amount of opportunity to us, but they also carry an enormous amount of risk to us. Can you tell us how you have lived the opportunities and the risks of migration?
Okay, certainly. For me, when you cross the border, it means you have a new identity. So you have to adapt to a new country, you have to adapt to a new culture, you have to adapt to a new language. So basically that's what I had to do, not just me, but my entire family. So when my parents moved to Romania from DRC for their job with the diplomatic service, they spoke no Romanian at all. So they had to adjust to the language, the culture, the work environment, the people. Plus, back then it was a communism time, so there weren't very many diverse people there. So of course my parents would stand out in Romania during that time. And then afterwards, moving to Greece, I was 3 years old when I moved there. So for me, it was, again, learning a new language, although I was very young. So it was easier for me to adapt and to quickly learn. And I was put in Greek school over there where I had to learn the language and the culture. So it was my parents' choice to do that because they wanted myself and my 2 siblings to adjust to the culture where we live, because they were given the option to put us in, let's say, a French school, like a diplomatic French school or English school. But they said, no, we'd rather have our kids go to the Greek school and kind of get to learn about the people and the culture. And after that, moving to Winnipeg when I was 10 again, getting used to the Canadian culture, which is a bunch of cultures because Canada is very diverse. So for me, moving to Canada, it was kind of like my whole life because I was used to being around people who were of different backgrounds. Even though at my school in Greece, I was the only Black kid there. But aside my classmates, I had friends from other countries too because attending all those diplomatic services and events with my parents. So some of the difficulties or risks for me would be, I guess, maybe adjusting to maybe a new language or a new culture. Like for instance, Greece and Romania and like my African culture as well. Like I'll just give a small example. Like we're very respectful to elders. We call them like Mr., Mrs. But when moving to Canada, it was like I have to call my friends' moms by their first name. You know, that's kind of the thing I wasn't used to. I still feel weird doing that. Like I'm still like, oh, Mrs. or in Mexican culture, auntie, uncle, even if they're not related to you, you know, you still have to do those kind of things. So for me, it was a little bit of different type of small cultural things, but it wasn't very difficult for me. So the way we are here in Canada with my family is that, of course, you know, we respect, we follow the Canadian values, and we try to, you know, embrace the Canadian culture as well, and at the same time, you know, not leave our culture too. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. And some of your examples certainly resonate, I'm sure, with me and I'm sure with many other folks. There's a piece of you that you always carry with you, no matter where you are, what stage in your life. But then there's also parts of you that transform, that evolve as you sort of soak in the context in which you find yourselves, wherever that is. Whoever that is, it is that you're suddenly surrounded by. So Tania, let me bring you into this conversation as well, and let me pose to you a question that you ask of viewers to a new animated monologue that you did as part of a theatrical series called Motus Monologues Undocu America podcast. This is a powerful short video that I encourage everyone to watch. I had the opportunity to see it a few days ago, and I believe Robin has shared the link to the animation through the Facebook event page. It's a couple of minutes long, so it won't take anyone too much time, but it will add a lot to your understanding of Tania, but also to the context of this conversation. And that question that you asked, if you partway into that video, is, do you know what is happening across our nation? Right, that's the question that you pose to viewers as you begin, as you take them through this journey of your lived experience. So let me ask you to focus on the last part of that question. Do you know what is happening across our nation, specifically across our nation? Now, I was born about 7 miles north of Mexico, north of the Rio Grande River in McAllen, Texas. You were born in the Mexican city of Chihuahua. Now, you are Ivy League educated. I am Ivy League educated. You were a teacher. I was a teacher. You live in Denver. I live in Denver. But our locations in that one moment, for me, that was 40 years ago. For you, that was many fewer years ago. Your location and my location in that one moment vis-a-vis the border marked me as a United States citizen, you as not. So the border certainly seems to matter, right? The the premise of this gathering beyond borders seems to be somewhat subverted, right? At least in this, at least as it manifests out of where you were and where I was all those many years ago, or perhaps more accurately, where your mother was and where my mother was. So to what extent should the border matter to your life now and to my life now?
You know, it's interesting that being born on one side or the other seems almost to be like luck. Like, oh, you know, you just happen to be in this place at this time when you were born. But it's clear to me that it's about power, right? And, you know, for example, my great-grandmother was born in Texas when it was still Mexico. And after it became the United States, my family, from my ancestors, were then pushed further south, just a few hours. But those hours south made an entire difference as to where my mother was born and then where I was born and then my entire trajectory. And the reason I say that it's about power is because then this is the way that countries can control who they have in their country and then who they can give rights to. And if we look across different places around the world, some borders are much more like cared for than others. So some borders are literally just like a line in the sand, like this divides you and me, great. And then some borders are highly militarized and highly protected, and there's bullets and there's death. And when I think about the border between me and my family and, you know, between here and my grandparents in Mexico, it doesn't make sense. It shouldn't matter, right? Like I should be able to go to Mexico and say hello and hug my family and then come back to my home here, to the house that I have bought here. But it does matter. And ultimately, I think it's the country's way to execute racialized oppression because they want to control a subset of people. And I learned from a very young age that being Mexican meant that the United States didn't want me. And so I was raised in Phoenix, Arizona, which again, border state, you know, we see that a lot. But I knew from a very young age that the United States just thought that Mexicans should not be in the United States. And it was very confusing because I was like, this was Mexican land. What are you talking about? But, you know, now there's this line drawn where I cannot return to the place where I was born. And it does matter very much in the way that my own family acts, right? Like my mom can't go home to see her parents. My dad didn't get to go home and see his father die. And that might happen in my lifetime, right? Like what happens when there's people that I care about in Mexico that I can then no longer go see just because there's a border somewhere that dictates, you know, this is the line you can't cross. So certainly when I tell my story in the monologue and when some of the other monologuists share their stories in the podcast series called Shoebox Stories, we share bits and pieces of what that's like to live in this sort of like an abusive relationship with the USA, because we have all of these dreams and hopes and ideas about what this country meant, and yet it's sort of like we're also being caged in here. Like you can live out your hopes and dreams, but you're going to have to sit in this cage. All of that to me makes it clear that borders should not matter, but undoubtedly they do.
Yeah, certainly, they continue to have an enormous impact on all of us. So thank you for sharing that. And let me just reiterate a comment Robin made in her introduction, encouraging viewers to chime in with questions as the conversation goes. We're about halfway through our hour. But as you all do that, I want to return to Patricia and continue this focus on borders and the fluidity of borders. So Tania very viscerally illustrated the continued impact, the meaningful, life-changing, life-molding impact that borders have, but borders are certainly fluid as well. And we've seen that along the US-Canadian border. It's often referred to as the longest undefended border between two countries. The current pandemic, Patricia, suggests that borders should be maintained, if for no other reason than as a way of limiting the failures of dysfunctional governance.
Okay. Yeah, this pandemic is a very difficult time for sure for people, to travel across borders. In the case of Canada right now, our government has decided to close the border for an extended time period. So it's really making it very hard for people. And in this situation, I'm just thinking now about the people, let's say, who are trying to immigrate to Canada and how their case or their file is being delayed because of this pandemic. So it's making it hard for them perhaps to even live healthier in their country, because let's say their country is in one country that has very low health system, not very good health system. So that's something that that I'm concerned about. And there's, as much as I like to say, I think we should open the borders, bring the people in, but there's, this is a very tough situation, and there's nothing really we can do about it.
Well, and it's also a fast moving
yes.
situation in which we're facing a slew of far from ideal options too. But it has been quite striking to watch as the relationship between the three North American countries has been evolving quite quickly. The Canadian border, as with the Mexican border with the U.S., both have been shut down in to a great extent, not entirely. There is still a good amount of traffic moving, both for trade, but also personal traffic, but certainly not like in the pre-pandemic time. And still, right, the conversation is very much ongoing at very high levels of the three countries about whether or not Canada and Mexico ought to be protecting themselves even more from what is clearly the worst version of the pandemic that has hit any country, which is what's happening in the U.S. right now. So let me bring the conversation back to you, Maria, and your work now as an immigration lawyer in Texas, right? Deep in the heart of Texas. I'm originally from South Texas, so these songs sort of roll off of my tongue far too naturally, even all these years that I've been out of Texas. Now you see in your work as a lawyer how politics and policies impact migrants' lives. Can you talk to us about how empathy and about how compassion intersect with the prejudice toward migrants and with the threat of detention and deportation that infuse immigration law and immigration policy in the United States?
Yes, definitely. I think something that's very important to highlight is politics do have to do a lot with immigration and how immigrants are perceived and how the community and society feels towards certain groups of immigrants. And we saw this whenever Mexicans were called rapists and you know, Mexico wasn't sending their best and we had bad hombres all around. And I felt attacked because I was, you know, coming from Mexico. And I don't want to think that I am the worst that was down there to be sent. But also we see it when there's this rhetoric about COVID and how the, you know, Asian community has been targeted because they are part of a problem, and how, you know, you are only afraid of the things that you don't know. That is something that I always like to highlight. What is said has an echo how immigrants are perceived and how people is treated, which is the most hurtful part of this all. You target your neighbor, you start targeting or seeing differently the people that you're surrounded with, unless you know them. Because once you know them, you start saying, Juan is not like that. Wizan is not like that. She's not a threat. She's my friend. She's my teacher. She's, you know, my child's mom. I mean, yes, you know, like my children's mom, friend's mom. So you start perceiving the immigrant community a little different. I think something that a shift in immigration that I can notice was the summer of 2018, when the US government started separating families. That is when something switched, because it was children. So it was easier for people or the community, the average American United States citizen, to say, oh my God, they're children. We keep them in cages. We are separating them from their parents. We are literally tearing them up. We are sending them to a whole different state. And once you hear this woman and these parents that were fleeing extreme violence or extreme poverty, gangs and just severe abuse, coming to seek safety in the United States and being torn apart from their children, and you see them going more than a month without knowing where their children were. And when you think about that child not knowing anything and not understanding why he's not with mom or dad, that was alarming. That was outrageous. So a lot of the community has started paying attention and looking around and wondering and inquiring what is wrong with our immigration policies. As of today, literally today, July the 17th, there is a new order saying that ICE must release children detained in Karnes in the detention center. Caveat there is they are to be released without their families. So right now, families are put into a spot where they have to decide whether they stay in a detention center with the threat of COVID, because at least 30 children and adults have tested positive for COVID in the detention center, yet they have to make the decision whether they remain with their children detained indefinitely, or whether they're once again separated and ICE releases only the children, sending the parents to adult detention. Those things create compassion. Those subjects make heads turn. Yet, we do have another part of the immigrant community that's not recognized, or that is targeted, or that is not considered the good kind of immigration. And this is my point. Politics come when you can divide immigration in the good kind and the bad kind. We just saw another example right now with international students. Universities have a long history of not wanting to give a declaration or to mess with the immigrant kind of like field, because it's too political. When they touch international students, Harvard and MIT threatened to sue, and ICE backed up. What happens with undocumented students? We have the good kind of immigration because international students came with a visa, but then the undocumented or DACA holder students are not being cared for on a way, because They arrive here undocumented. And this is when I look back at Tania and I say, how lucky were you to be born at certain time? How lucky were you to have crossed that imaginary line created by man on certain way, whether it was with a visa or whether it wasn't. When we talk about DACA holders, we just got a big win in the Supreme Court saying that, you know, USCIS should continue, or the US government should continue to receive these applications, and they should be able to renew their work permits to remain in the United States because they didn't have a say. A lot of them, as I did when I was a child, I didn't have a say when I came here the first time, but yet I am, or I was, and people that remained in the United States when they came as children continue to be punished by a system because of the way how they crossed the border at a certain age when they had no say. So how compassion and prejudice affects this? We need to go back to the person. It is, and I'm gonna use again Tania as an example. It is Tania's life. What she was saying right now is you have to think of that as a possibility of leaving a country, of having a profession, of not knowing whether you're going to be asked to leave at certain point. We are all under a lot of pressure right now because of COVID and uncertainty. I don't think a lot of us kind of think well that idea of not knowing where we're going back to normal, or when we're going to be able to go back to work, or what is going to happen down the road. Imagine living like that every single day of your life for decades, not really knowing what's going to happen. Is it worth going to school? Is it worth going into debt? Is it worth getting a house? Is it worth or not? Because at the end of the day, you feel American, but you don't belong here. You have already acquired, or you have already assimilated the culture or the language, as Patricia was saying. Once you move to a new country, you can have like a start assimilating. But is it worth when you are not truly belonging? I think the threat of deportation is torture. That's really how I see it. It is, I cannot imagine the anxiety and uncertainty of like not really knowing what's going to happen, and knowing for sure, because the only thing that, you know, undocumented immigrants know in the United States is that they're a big ticket item for exchange that politicians are going to use to gain votes, whether it is because they're against or because they're pro immigration. But you know you are being used. Immigrants built the United States. Immigrants continue to give maintenance to the United States, yet they are second-class citizens.
Well, thank you so much for the thought, Maria. So certainly when you say, you know, you were fortunate to be born when you were, you know, that is something that resonates profoundly with me, because you know, I'm the youngest of 5 kids. My family lived in about 7 miles away from where I was born for several years before I was born. Only it was right on the southern side of the border, in the city called named Reynosa, and then they moved just over the border to McAllen soon before I was born. But just to add a little bit of context to one of the comments that you made, you referenced today, July 17th, as being an important date for families that are currently being held in immigration and customs enforcement, what I call family residential centers. Critics tend to refer to them as baby jails. They're prisons of one kind or another. There's 3 of them spread throughout the United States, 2 in Texas, 1 in Pennsylvania. And today, July 17th, is an important date because on June 26th, a federal judge issued an order saying that by today, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, had to either release the children, and ICE could do that either by themselves, or they'd be going to sponsors, to other adults, or with their parents alongside them. ICE has shown absolutely no interest in releasing them from their parents. In fact, the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, a few weeks ago said something like, "We are not going to engage in a jailbreak." The judge's order, though, is premised on a determination that the situation with inside these facilities is getting to the point of being is at the point of being quite dangerous. And just to quote the language from the judge's order, Judge Gee wrote that these facilities, quote, are on fire and there is no more time for half measures. So not holding back the conclusion there. Now, Tania, we hear a lot about the way in which law and policy are relevant to conversations about migration. Maybe I hear more of that than the rest of humanity does, just because this is what I do every day. I like to think that I'm sort of the center of the universe, right? In that sense. But I know that it's not. But I also know that whether it's by birth or by training, you are a storyteller. And so can you tell us how it is that stories can and stories do affect the lived experience of migrants?
Of course. I think Maria brought up the negative aspects of stories, right? And how stories can really shape all the negative thoughts that we are fed into ourselves. And a great example is one that I mentioned in my monologue, is that growing up in Phoenix, Arizona meant that I was just listening to Sheriff Arpaio every day. And because I was listening to Sheriff Arpaio and the news covering Sheriff Arpaio every day, I came to really hate my identity as a Mexican immigrant. And it took me probably like almost my first 20 years of life to then realize, like, no, this is something I should have pride in. This is something that is an amazing part of my life. I think I actually came out as undocumented before I came out as being Mexican. And that was just due to the stories that I was hearing and that I was telling myself about what it meant to be coming from the other side of our southern border. But I think on the other side, right, like stories are also an amazing way to process trauma and to encourage healing within ourselves. I think every time that I think about processing some of my memories and experiences and do so in community, it really like uplifts my spirits. And I'm like, oh yes, like these are things that are now in the past, and some pieces are beautiful and I can bring those forward with me. And then the beautiful thing is that stories, when we share them with each other, can then really impact people's actions. I think for Motus Theater specifically, I mean, we work a lot with storytelling. And what we say to people is that our secret weapon is that you're going to fall in love with us once you hear our story. And when that happens, you're going to hold our stories really, really close when you're making important decisions. So the next time that you're going out to vote, you're going to think about us. And the next time that you're thinking about what topic to bring up at your next like family reunion, or the next time that you have to write an op-ed, all of our stories should be the ones that come up for you, because this is urgent, this is important. And so I think the gap then lies when people don't hear our stories. And then there's this space in between, right? Like between knowing that this is something I should care about, but not doing something about it because it's not yet close to my heart. And in that in-between space is where we really very much need people to lean in. Sometimes I think it's uncomfortable for people, and not sometimes. Oftentimes it's uncomfortable for people to really lean into stories based on trauma and based on oppression. Particularly white people, because then there's this feeling of guilt, right? But we need to sort of get past those feelings and actually like listen, because when we listen, then we can practice all sorts of allyship, and then we can figure out the right ways to take action. So stories are immensely powerful, both in one way and the other for ourselves, but then ultimately for the way that we engage with each other.
Well, one of the things, thank you, Tania, for that. One of the things that is coming across through all of the conversation is the sense that our identities are complicated, complex, and constantly evolving. So let me bring in a request by one of the viewers to ask that you reflect on the intersectional foundation of your identity, and how it is that is relevant to this conversation about migration, about borders, intersectionalities, the notion that we are all multiple beings in one, right? I am a male, I am Latino, I'm a U.S. citizen, lots of other things, and certainly people who don't like me would add many other characteristics to that description that I'll just leave out for now. But this is an important piece of the way that we experience the world, and the way that the world sees us, right? Not as a single discrete being, not just a man, right? But as all of these things, and at various moments in a day, nonetheless across the decades of life, I'm going to experience various aspects of my identity in a more heightened way than at other moments. So let me invite you, at the request of the audience, to reflect on how that sense of intersectionality, how the reality of intersectionality comes into this conversation. And maybe, Patricia, we could start off with turning to you.
Yes, certainly. So to provide an example, when I came to Canada, I was, of course, 10 years old. I had my first job here, high school, middle school, parts of elementary school. So for me, when I entered the job field during either end of high school or in university, it was interesting because few of the first jobs that I had applied for, people would be, oh no, she's too overqualified, but like those things, I felt like, okay, sure, maybe I am overqualified, but is that really why perhaps, you're not hiring me? Like, could it be because, I don't know, I have an accent? Could it be because of my skin color? Could it be because maybe I'm way too overeducated for a Black person? So there's been some of those things that I had also faced, very small things, and so did my family too. But those things we always have to embrace, and we always have to know how to be strong in those things. Because what I also do is I also mentor youth, and I had youth asking me, how did you get how did you get to become who you are now? Like, was it that easy? I said, no, it was not easy. I had to go through obstacles. I had to go through challenges. I had people saying, no, you're too young, no, you're this, but, that still didn't stop me from getting to where I am. Like the people who are watching now, if you want to do something and you feel like you're being pushed down, whether because of your race, your religion, your background, or where you're from, doesn't matter. You just have to keep going strong, and you have to keep that strong skin, because for me, it was not easy to get where I am at. I had obstacles too, but I kept my head up. I had my support from my family, and I want to see more people, achieve their goals, and especially newcomers, because we come from a different country, we come very educated, and we can contribute with that education within the country. So I give example of Canada. We have a lot of people arriving from Middle East, Africa, engineers, doctors. But what makes me upset is that, you know, they can't get those jobs here right away because, again, paperwork, or maybe they have to adapt to the language and stuff like that. So it hurts me, like it makes me upset when I take a taxi, or an Uber, I meet an Uber driver who tells me he's a doctor. And I'm like, what are you doing driving an Uber driver? You should be in the hospital, you know, curing people. So this is one of the things that does make me upset about immigration, and seeing people who are super qualified, but then pushed down, maybe because it could be for various reasons, not just the paperwork, but it could be even discriminatory reasons. No, we don't want this guy because he's from this country, or he has this skin color. So that's one of the things that makes me upset. But for my case, you know, I had faced difficulties, but I didn't give up. And those of you who are struggling or who are trying to achieve somewhere, you know, don't give up. You will be facing those situations. For my case, like I came to Canada legally with my parents' work. So it wasn't about the paper or anything, but it was about being way overqualified or being way over this. But again, don't let that stop you, and just keep moving forward.
You know, a wonderful reminder that the obstacles don't cease, no matter how much how much success by any measure, subjective or objective, you achieve, and it can be quite maddening to run up against a no and not understand why it is. Tania or Maria, can I invite either one of you to chime in on this notion of intersectionality and how it plays out in your own experience?
I can start. I identify as bisexual within the LGBTQ spectrum. And for me, what comes up is the just amazing role models within the immigrant rights movement. And quite honestly, the immigrant rights movement has historically been led by queer people and trans women of color. And, you know, it's not coincidental that these are also the people that are heavily oppressed within the immigration system. And so if we think about trans people in detention centers and the way that they are sort of experiencing the system is still different than mine, but I like to think of them as like role models and leading the charge. And so I get really excited thinking about the ways that intersectionality moves within the immigrant rights movement, even if sometimes the broader world forgets that the immigrant rights movement is definitely led by people who are just all different shapes and sizes, because immigration is not just a Latino thing. It's not just a Mexican thing. And it's not just a US thing, right? Like clearly it's all over the world. And so those are my 2 cents.
Thank you. Maria?
Yeah, just to second what Patricia and Tania have said, I think that identifying myself as someone that can be her best version throughout has been very powerful for me. Coming from a Catholic woman in Mexico and being part of the broad community, to being a minority and identifying as a woman of color in the United States who fights for social justice, yes, is, you know, pro-life, respecting life from the womb throughout the life and until natural death, but yet being very vocal about, you know, immigrant rights and social justice and trying to fill this gap that's regularly kind of like forgotten about here in the middle, has been very powerful to be able to sit in the same table with the LGBT community, with people that's not from a Latino or Hispanic background, but still an immigrant, and realizing that we have much more things in common, that we all want social justice, and that we should focus on the things that we crave for and that we can fight for hand in hand, realizing that you should love your neighbor, as it comes, and that if you kind of like even not dig a little, but just take the time, take 5 minutes to go out there, enjoy their music, enjoy their food. We are multicultural. We all move. We are moving human beings that were called for community. That's the reason why we have families. That's the reason why we, like exchange. That's why COVID is so hard on us, because we crave being with others. That's what we are meant to be. So just, opening up the door and even a window, if that's the only thing that you're wanting to give right now, just open up the window and be perceptive and be receiving of what the other has to do without judgment. And you will find that we have a lot more things in common, that we can coexist, and that nobody is at risk. That we all have great things to share, that we all have great things to put on the plate, and that we are going to be a lot more successful once we allow ourselves to be exposed and to receive what the others have to give.
Thank you. Patricia, did you want to add one more comment to that?
Yes, I think it's also one thing I forgot to mention. It's very important for immigrants to help other immigrants. When I say help, I mean like show them how it is to adapt in a new country. Show them where to, something easy. Show them where to go get their new social insurance card or their health card, or even things like show them where to go and visit monuments, museums, etc. Because I find that I've seen people when they come to this country, I'll give Canada, for example, they come, they're stressed out, they don't know what to do, their English is not good, and they're just depressed, they need the company of other people to show them, hey, this is how it works. And it's also good the way I deal with newcomers. I also, invite them to cultural events. So they meet people from other countries too, because this is how Canada and the US is. It's so multicultural, like you guys mentioned, and we have to get used to be working with people from diverse backgrounds. So that's what I wanted to say, is another way to help out is uplift, and show newcomers how it is like to adjust and live in the country.
Well, thank you. Well, with that, let me. We're rapidly running out of time, but let me just pose one final question to all three of you, and ask that you answer it in one sentence or less, just to give us something to all begin the rest of our day with and the weekend with, and just to contemplate as we. We continue hearing more about migration and about border policies and politics in the coming days, weeks, and months. And then that question is, what is right? What is correct about our migration policies, whether it's at a national level, at an international level? I'll leave that to you. But please, in one quick sentence or less, let me begin with Tania, then Maria, and then Patricia.
I would just say that the immigration system is functioning as it's meant to. So it's definitely going the way that people intended it to, which is to keep people out. I can't come up with something that I particularly like at this moment.
Fair enough. Maria.
I am going to second that. I cannot think of anything that's good other than the people that makes decision knows exactly what to do to keep immigrants out. They are doing it, and the only way that that's going to change is whenever the people request that the right immigration policies are put in place, because we know they have the power to make the law be complied with. It's just a matter of having the right policy in place.
Thank you. Patricia?
I would just say, I would also second what both Maria and Tania said. And for Canada, the immigration policy is working at its best, but of course, it's not perfect, but all we have to do is just wait
Right. Thank you so much, and I'll use my moderator's privilege to add my response to that question. What is right about our migration policy? And I'll say it's the three of you. It's the people who continue and their families who continue to have the courage to pick up wherever they are and to move on to something different, something potentially better, something always complicated, always difficult, and always walking into the unknown. So thank you all so much. Patricia, Kumbakisaka, Tania, Chairez, Maria Aguilar, it's been an absolute pleasure and an enormous honor to get to talk to you this hour. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who's been watching. And I'll turn things over to Robin, who will pop in and wrap things up for us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all to our panelists and to Cesar for moderating this conversation. And for me, it's been an incredible honor to hear your stories and of resiliency, of passion, and how you've dedicated your lives to uplifting others. So I would thank you all, and I thank those of you, those who were tuned into this conversation. And we hope everyone has a fantastic Friday and the rest of the weekend. Thank you very much.